Hello, this is Gina from Prospect, Kentucky, and you're listening to Scandal Water with Ashley and Candy,
where the tea is hot and the conversation lively.
Your hosts, Candy
and Ashley,
will discuss a peculiar story somehow related to the entertainment industry. This podcast might not change the world, but it just might satisfy your thirst for an intriguing tale.
Oh, it's that time of day. Tune in and hear what the ladies say. It's time to bend your ear when the silver screen appears. Stories about the stage and screen and everything in between. So come on and join the fun. The curtain opens in 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, Ashley.
good morning.
We are getting ready to delve into such an interesting but big topic.
Maybe we should have said good night.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Good night, Ashley.
Good night.
We're going to be talking about late night talk shows.
And you have your late night voice on right now.
Oh, do I?
Late night talk shows.
Late night talk shows. Join us. No, it's fascinating. It's so funny. I went into this and I knew I was going to be interested because I used to watch talk shows all the time, late night talk shows. And I knew this would be interesting and nostalgic. I did not know what a big topic it would be. So right from the get-go, I think we need to let you guys know this would be a very, very long episode were we not to break it into 2 parts. So
Right.
this will be a 2-parter. Both parts, I think you will find equally fascinating. All right, we'll talk more about that later. But let's start with something fun. This is a very short clip from a late night talk show, and I'm going to set it up just a tiny bit. Ashley, are you familiar with Karnak the Magnificent?
Karnak the Magnificent, was he a magician?
Well, it's a bit.
Oh.
It's a bit that was done by Johnny Carson.
Oh, yes, he wore the turban, right?
Yes.
Yes.
He would come out from behind the curtain. He would have a feathered turban.
Yeah.
He had a cape. He would claim to be this psychic named Karnak the Magnificent. And do you remember how it went? What was his gimmick?
I don't remember. Did he hold a card to his head?
He would hold an envelope to his head and be using his psychic powers. He would tell you the answer, and then he would open the envelope
and see the question?
read the question.
Oh, like Jeopardy before Jeopardy.
Kinda, yes. And of course, Ed McMahon, his loyal sidekick, would be there to feed right into the bit. Okay? So this is so short. This is just one example of a Karnak bit.
Sis boom ba.
Sis boom ba.
Describe the sound made when a sheep explodes.
That looks like that maybe they didn't know what the question was going to be. That looks like real laughter.
I think so. And that's part of what made it so great was the way they responded.
They reacted.
Right. Ed McMahon is crying.
Yes.
He is literally crying. It's the cutest thing. There are many, many famous bits that come from late night talk shows or games. Either way. Can you think of any?
Wasn't Lip Sync Battle started on
Yes.
Late Night with Jimmy Fallon?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one I love.
Top 10 list with David Letterman.
Absolutely.
I used to love to watch those.
Me too. You know another one I love?
What?
James Corden's crosswalk musicals.
Oh, yes.
They make me laugh every time, but
Although
then I
I'd be
also
super
enjoy them.
irritated if I was the driver.
I know, but that makes it so much funnier when you see them honking.
Like,
and-
get out of the way. This is New York.
It's hysterical. Oh, and James Corden's carpool karaoke.
Yeah, I never watched him, but I know what those are.
Yeah, so many good bits. So many good bits. Another one that comes to mind, Jay Leno's jaywalking. That
What
was
did he
always
do?
cute. He would just go up
where
to
he questions people.
Yes.
And usually we learn that our people in America don't know much.
about history in particular.
Yes,
But
yes.
but it makes you laugh.
Like, when was the Battle of 1812? I don't know.
Exactly. Okay. Well, I thought that would be a fun way to get into this. You mentioned when we did, I think it was our memorable talk show moments episode, that you did watch late night.
I did.
In particular, you mentioned you liked Craig Ferguson, but
Yes.
tell us a little bit more about your history with late night talk shows.
I liked David Letterman. So I watched him.
Me too.
I liked his top 10 lists. I just liked his personality. But after him would be Craig Ferguson. And I am a very late night person. You know, I have trouble sleeping a lot, so I would be up late watching those. But with Craig Ferguson in particular, I just thought that was really my only exposure to him. He was on the Drew Carey show, but I never watched the Drew Carey show. And I just thought he was so nice, and his questions, he seemed so real and genuine. And there's a particular moment, I may have seen it live, I am not sure, when Brittany was in all of her trouble that she was in. He was the only person who came out and did this really heartfelt long monologue about, listen, we don't need to make fun of her.
Right.
We need to be there for her. I don't remember all of it,
Be
but
empathetic.
be empathetic. And he's also been very open about his own previous addictions and recovering from that. And he just seemed like such a real person that I enjoyed watching him.
Yeah.
And one thing he would also do is when he would sit down with his guest, he would rip up the questions and just throw them away. And he would just talk to the person.
Yes. Yes. So in order to prepare for this, I did use several articles, that type of thing, but I came across something that was just a gem. It was this series put out by CNN, and it was called The Story of Late Night. And it was published in 2021, and it was, I think, something like 6 episodes. If you are interested, it's brilliant.
Who's streaming it?
Goodness. I want to say it was on Hulu, but I am
Okay.
not positive.
Okay.
Just look it up, guys. But I'm telling you, really, really interesting. They had so many people that came on to talk on it. You had everybody from Conan O'Brien to Jimmy Fallon to people who were involved in, you know, the talk shows during that time period, like the president of NBC, the vice president of NBC, Paul Reiser. I mean, all these different comedians and executives and people who worked on the shows. And it was just fascinating to hear them give you all the inside scoop. Plus, tons and tons of video clips.
Oh, that'd be
yeah,
good.
it was so good. But it was interesting because they started this series by saying, you know, why do we love late night talk shows?
Yeah.
And it was interesting because they would just skip from one person to another as they would offer some little comment about what made them so appealing to people. And there were things I'd never thought about before. Obviously, you think about the fact that it's funny, it's entertaining, but it's so intimate. You're watching it late at night. A lot of times it's after the kids have gone to bed or your spouse or who, you know, anybody else in your family. And it's just you and this person who's basically in the bedroom entertaining you, you know?
Their company.
Yes. Yes. Company, comforting. Sometimes if something's going on in the world that's disturbing, this person would offer some type of comfort in that situation as well. So there were so many different insights they offered. So I just want to say right here at the top of the episode that shout out to this series.
Yeah.
I did pull a lot of information from them. Okay. But what we're going to do is we're going to start with the history. We're going to kind of go back to the very beginning and then work our way through. To be quite honest, a lot of this flows through The Tonight Show.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Were they the first one?
Well, they are given the credit for being the first one, but I want to start by sharing something that is a little surprising, perhaps. Something I didn't know anyway. Do you know who is actually credited as being the first ever late night talk show host?
No, I don't.
It's a woman.
Oh, really?
I know. In the documentary, there is a woman named Maureen Mock. She is a former TV exec and professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and she talks about this briefly. She says this woman, who was the first ever late night talk show host, is Faye Emerson. And of course, this comes up in other sources as well. One of these was a Deadline article that I found. But Faye Emerson had this 15-minute show called The Faye Emerson Show.
Nice.
It began airing on CBS on October 24th of 1949.
Nice.
Yes. And it played in the local East Coast markets before the network moved it. It regularly aired up around 11 p.m. and it went until March 1950. So it was kind of short-lived. But
And a short show, only 15 minutes.
well, actually, let me clarify. I think in 1950 was when NBC picked it up for a time, and then it went back to CBS, and it actually went off the air for good in 1951. So it moved around a little bit.
Okay.
But Faye was a Hollywood actress who at one point was married to President Franklin D. Roosevelt's son.
I thought you were going to say Franklin D. Roosevelt. I was like, that is not
Wait
true.
a minute. Jaywalking is not going to get me. I know my history.
Eleanor would have had something to say about that.
But she was
Okay,
married
say that again. His son, she was married to
She
his...
was married to his son.
Okay.
Elliott Roosevelt, just for a time.
Okay.
Yeah. So she would get on this show, and she was not afraid to address touchy subjects. She was not afraid to speak with very notable guests, politicians, or whatever. She might go from one show where they would be talking politics, and the next show she would have clowns on. She just covered everything. In fact, there's one little clip I saw where she was opening viewer mail, and somebody commented on the fact that she was a woman talking about these deep subjects, and she came up with this nice little response to that. She was very...
Faye's like, I was married to a president's son.
She's like, excuse
I've got
me?
some words for you.
Yes, yes. So she was very intelligent, pretty much feministic for that time. She
Yeah.
would even wear pants.
Ooh, stop it.
I know. And she received praise for her work. But again, despite the fact that she was a woman and she was a pioneer in this field of late night talk shows, it was actually about 40 more years before there was another female late night
You're right
talk
there.
show host.
Who is the other one?
Joan Rivers.
Joan had a late night. Okay. Or did she have her own show, or was she
actually
filling in
did.
for Johnny?
Well, she did fill in
Both.
for Johnny, but yes, she also had a show for
You're
a time.
right, there's
yeah.
not.
So I wanted to start with that. Thought that was fascinating. But now let's move to The Tonight Show. Most people do consider The Tonight Show to be responsible for the birth of late night talk shows.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you this question. Ashley, do you remember a time when the TV would just go off the
Yes.
air at a
Yes.
certain point?
Yes.
Tell everybody what would happen, because our young kids are not going to know this.
Gosh, do I remember it personally, or do I just know that it happened? I'm not sure of that answer. But it would just go boop, or they would sometimes play the national
They
anthem.
would play the national anthem.
and
There
then
would
it
be a
would go off.
flag.
Uh-huh.
Yep. And
And it would just turn off. You're done for the night.
Sometimes you get the little
Yes.
what are they called? The UHC
The
stripes
colors.
or the colors, whatever they are.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, static.
Yeah.
You're done.
That's it for now, guys.
Yeah.
Till the morning.
Young people, you didn't have the choices you had today.
Yeah.
Like you might have
I
had
think that's why stuff got so famous, because there wasn't a lot of choices.
100%. 100%. This is it. You had
Mm-hmm.
what? 4 networks, and
Can you imagine if we were only one of 4 podcasts?
we would be doing really well.
So good.
We'd be so popular. All right.
We hope.
But the thing is, in the early 1950s, it was just actually becoming more common to have a TV in your
Right.
home. Let alone, thinking about all these different programming options that we have today. So as we were going through the 50s and people were getting more TVs, generally the night just ended after the nightly news. By 11 or 11:30, your TV viewing was done. You did not have a choice.
Yeah.
It was over. So these TV executives thought, you know what? Economically, this would be a good move to perhaps put something on late at night because there's potential to make
got-
some money.
Yeah, and you've got third shift workers too. I
Right,
guess.
right. In fact, one Entertainment Weekly reporter who was on the documentary noted that the bar was really low. To paraphrase her point, she said, you know what? Pretty much anything is going to be more entertaining than static. So why not try it?
That's would
right?
be a tagline. I'm better than static.
I am better than static. So what happened was in 1952, the Today Show came out and it did
yeah.
really well. And so some people at NBC were like, you know what? Wonder if we ought to try this at night.
And call it The Tonight Show.
Yep, really clever. That's what started it all. They needed a host, so they started looking around, and there was this entertainer named Steve Allen who had been hosting a late night radio show, and he came to their attention. They're like, you know what? Maybe this guy could do it. His son, Bill Allen, spoke on the documentary, and he commented that his dad's experience of having to entertain people via radio, which also meant killing time and improvising and a lot of experimentation, set him up for what he would actually need to do as the first ever host of The Tonight Show. So he had a good background for it, right? The documentary even listed Steve Allen as a co-creator of the show because they were figuring everything out for
As
the
they
first
went.
time. Yeah, it didn't exist before him, which is hard for us, I think,
Yeah.
to comprehend. But a lot of the decisions that they made or the bits they came up with, or even things like putting a desk out there for the host to use, they were establishing that for the very first time.
That's cool.
Yeah, very cool. Bill Allen, Steve's son, even shared a small excerpt from a very famous letter that Steve wrote to the head of NBC when the show was being planned and it was in the works. Now, again, remembering that the original intent was that they were going to model The Tonight Show after The Today Show.
Yeah.
They had told Steve they wanted him to do things like news and weather and sports. And in this letter, he basically said, you know what? I'm a comedian. That's
Yeah.
not my thing.
Yeah.
My intention is to go out there and make the audience laugh. And they let him. They let him.
Because they said better than static.
Exactly. What have we got to
What we got
lose?
to
If this is what this guy can do,
Let's
okay,
try
fine.
it. Let's try it.
Yep. So Steve debuted the first version of what would become The Tonight Show in the summer of 1953. It aired locally on a New York NBC station, and then when it was successful, NBC went ahead and premiered the national version on September 27th of 1954, which is like 71 years ago.
Ooh,
Think about
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So long ago. Here's the other thing. It was a live show. I mean,
Oh, it wasn't pre-recorded.
no,
Yeah.
it was live.
Yeah.
And he didn't have a script.
No.
Can you imagine this? Steve Allen would go out there with
Just-
basically like a little outline of what's going to happen. And this fella would just deal with whatever came up with on the spot. It
That's
was
admirable.
crazy, crazy. It was very unpredictable, very fun. He was always doing bits. Sometimes they would have him doing things that were potentially very dangerous. In fact, I don't remember the details exactly, but at one point they were going to shoot this man out of a cannon.
No.
And he said, you know what? I would like us to test this out one time before I do it. And they put sandbags in and tested it. And those sandbags did not clear. He could have been killed. This man was doing everything.
I'm so glad he was like, wait. Let's think about that.
Yes. I mean, at least he had the sense to do that
Yes.
because it sounded like he was game for most
Yeah.
anything. They referred to what he did on stage as being wacky and experimental. He would let them dip him in vats of jello, pie smash with the guests, put tea bags on himself and dip him in water.
Oh,
Crazy
mercy.
stuff. But again, these people, these talk show hosts who were talking on the documentary would say, how many bits today are still influenced
Because of him?
because of what he originated.
Wow.
It is so cool. But anyway, The Tonight Show was incredibly successful, but the late night still did not bring in the money that primetime did. So when they
there's
saw
not as many people awake.
Right. But the thing is, they're like about the money.
Yeah,
And they're
yeah.
like, you know what? Everybody's loving Steve and loving what he's doing. Why don't we move him to prime time? And then, he's really, really popular. We'll put him up against Ed Sullivan because Ed Sullivan has been stealing the show.
That's true.
This is actually what caused the change. They said, all right, we're moving Steve Allen to prime time. He's going to do the Steve Allen Show, which of course was also on NBC. That started in 1956 and was more of a scripted variety show format, which actually Steve Allen was getting pretty stressed out over what he was doing anyway. So
Yeah.
I think he was a little excited about this.
Yeah.
But what this means is
There's an opening.
there's an opening. Yeah. And they didn't know what to do. So for a brief time, they actually tried their original idea of the Today Show type format.
Of news and such.
They called it America After Dark, and everybody said it was absolutely terrible. so
Because they don't want that at night.
it didn't last long.
Yeah.
And they had to find a new host.
Is this where Johnny Carson enters the building?
No, there's somebody in between.
Really?
Yeah. Have you heard of Jack Parr?
Yes.
Okay. It's him.
Oh, okay.
It's him. I didn't know a thing about this man.
He was a comedian as well, correct?
Yes. You know what? In my mind, I think I always pictured Jack Palance.
Oh, that's totally different.
Totally different.
It's not
totally
even the
different.
same.
Jack Parr was an interesting little fella.
Okay.
I did not anticipate what I was going to find out about this
Okay.
guy. Okay. So he was a comedian, a TV radio personality, and an occasional game show host. And he was already under contract with NBC. So they're like, you know what? Still better than Static.
Better than Static.
Let's
Let's
give him a
go.
try, you know?
Let's go.
So he started in July of 1957. And while his style was very different from Steve Allen's, he also killed it. They were kind of surprised how quickly he got his flow going.
Yeah.
He did really well. One man interviewed on the documentary who has written a book about television commented that Steve was an entertainer, but Jack Parr came across as a person, which took me back to what you were saying.
about Craig.
Yes, exactly. They said that Jack didn't do all the bits, but he could have really intimate,
Relatable.
yes, relatable conversations with people, which really made it a talk show.
Yeah.
And he also would be vulnerable and tell personal stories about his own life, which made him connect to his audience and the guests. And his ratings actually, after a time, beat Steve Allen's.
Oh,
Fun fact, Dick Cavett got his start while Jack was doing the show. He was a copy boy who decided that he was going to like be a little, take a risk. He shared a few of his jokes with Jack. And Jack would later joke about this and say that Dick came up to him in a bathroom and was like, here, like passes him this paper with notes on it or jokes on it. But Jack ended up using one that killed.
Oh.
And before you knew it, Dick had been hired to do some writing for the show.
Nice.
And of course, ultimately, we'll talk about this later, Dick goes on to host his own talk show starting in 1968. But anyway, Jack Paar is credited for introducing some of the important characteristics of late night talk shows that we still see today. For example, he's the one who started bringing politicians on when they were doing their campaign, trails. And so that's kind of started that. He's also the one who basically came up with the format that we all recognize. He's the guy who started doing a monologue that he would come out and deliver it standing, in front of the curtain.
The camera.
And just the way he did different things, he's the guy. Even bringing a couch on. That's
for the
him.
guest to sit on?
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh.
Now, I'm going along watching this show thinking, okay, Jack Paar, he sounds like such a fun guy. He sounds so accomplished. And this is when all of a sudden they said, so about Jack Paar.
Oh, no.
What people didn't know was how neurotic he could be.
Yeah.
And also how difficult he was to work for. That was Dick Cavett who commented on that. And also, if he didn't like you, he didn't like you.
Ooh.
He hated Mickey Rooney, for example.
No.
And he would if he didn't like you, he would do little barbs, little jokes about you. Yeah. So talk about memorable talk show moments.
Not my precious Mickey Rooney.
Well, this does not involve Mickey.
Okay.
It involves Jack Paar, but this is one I had never heard about. All right?
I'm
Are you
ready.
ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. So one night, Jack had a guest on, and somehow in their conversation, they referenced the WC. Do you know what the WC is? It's a term they used to use, apparently, for water closet, a bathroom.
Oh.
It was just a reference to a bathroom.
Yeah.
Okay. At that time, apparently, however they phrased it, whatever, it was a bit risque.
Okay.
And the execs or whoever's in charge of this ends up censoring it. Jack is furious. So I'm going to play this little short clip where first you hear Dick Cavett making a comment about the incident, and then you're going to hear a little clip from Jack's show where it actually happens. And then I think somebody else might chime in with a comment. But the point is, I do want you to know this is 60 or 70-year-old videotapes, right?
Sure.
So you are going to hear a little bit
Clicking.
of static
Okay.
and clicking. Just be prepared. It's very short, but it's very interesting.
Jack came on the next night, did his monologue, sat down at the desk, started the show, and just suddenly, like a lightning bolt,
there must be a better way of making a living than this. You have been peachy to me always.
Did he just
and
quit?
Jack walked off his show.
We were all dumbfounded in the control room. And my first thought was, this is a joke.
It was a stunning, shocking moment.
It's Richter scale.
Because they censored him on Water Closet?
Yes, he literally
Quit his job?
in the middle of the show walked off. I'm like, what? How have I never heard about this?
I don't know.
And it's so funny because even as they cut from one person to another, one of them's like, he went to Japan with his family. He went here, he went here, he went here. And the last guy goes, he was at home. But basically he just was like,
I'm done.
I'm done. The future of The Tonight Show was in jeopardy.
I'd say so.
And NBC worked with him and convinced him to come back. It was more than a month past. Like there was time here. And weeks later, when he did return, I'm not going to play this for you guys, but I watched it. He walks out. Thunderous applause.
I bet.
It goes on and on and on. And talk show hosts know how to milk a crowd. So
Sure.
do, comedians. So big pause. And he says, as I was saying before I was interrupted.
Oh my God.
brings down the house. And then when they finally stop applauding, he says, I believe my last words were, there has to be a better way to make a living than this.
Yeah.
Long pause. Well, I've looked.
That's cute. That's cute.
I know. So anyway, I thought that was just so fun. Well, I mean, in a crazy way.
Yeah, in a crazy
But,
way.
yes.
In a looking back at history way.
Exactly.
Very stressful had we been in that control room.
Oh, would have hated it. Would have been panic stricken. So he actually left for good in 1962. I believe the reason was that he wanted to spend more time with his family.
So how long had that been since he walked off? How long was he back?
Oh, he made it a couple more years because he walked off in 1960 and this is 1962.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, the NBC execs are tasked with finding a replacement. And soon, of course, they're considering so many different people. But one of the men who comes to their attention is Johnny Carson, who did have experience on TV and at the time was hosting a game show called Who Do You Trust? They decided they did want him, but until he was available, because the game show wouldn't let him out, they had several guests fill in. One of those was Merv Griffin.
Merv.
Yeah. He did such a great job that they actually started to question if they had chosen the right host. He did so well, in fact, that he was given a daytime talk show that started right around the same time that Johnny actually did begin doing The Tonight Show.
Okay.
So that's how Merv Griffin got started, was
Nice.
being a guest host for this Tonight Show. And you know what? Let's take a break. And when we come back, we'll talk about Johnny Carson and The Tonight Show.
We love our sponsors. They help make our podcast possible, but we also know that some of you prefer to enjoy your tea without any interruptions. Well, if that's the case, you'll be excited to learn that you can now listen to Scandal Water free of sponsor ads on Apple Podcasts for only $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year. The best part? By subscribing, you'll also receive access to our exclusive bonus content. To sign up, just go to Apple Podcasts and search for Scandal Water Podcast, and you'll see the link. Thanks for helping us keep the tea brewing. Cheers!
And we are back. So, Ashley, do you remember Ed McMahon? Of course, we've already said that was Johnny's sidekick. He was also the announcer for Johnny. How did he introduce Johnny?
Here's Johnny. Because in The Shining, he makes, Jack Nicholson says that in The Shining.
It's kind of a little send-up of it or
send-up,
whatever.
yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Johnny is on the show now. Ed McMahon is there with him. And it took a little bit of time for Johnny to find his groove, and then he absolutely started to kill it. Now, here's a little side note that I thought was interesting. He was so personable on stage. As a talk show host, I think Johnny Carson was just so likable. Do you agree with that?
I do. I've not seen full shows, but I've seen clips, and I think that he was.
Yeah. Well, what people said on this documentary was that in person, he was very aloof. Yeah. Now, he actually, in an interview at some point, spoke to this. He said, people will say I'm aloof. I'm actually very shy. That's what they don't know about me. But everybody would agree that he seemed a little distant if you were relating to him in person, but that he would absolutely come to life in front of an audience. And that one of the things they loved about him was that little boyish twinkle in his eye. Yeah. As Johnny would go through his 30-year run as a talk show host, one of the things that came up a lot on the documentary was how careful Johnny would be not to alienate his audience. He was on, especially in his early years, it was a very, very political, volatile time. It was such a time of unrest and upheaval.
Yeah.
Civil rights movement, the politics, war, so many things going on. So Johnny, knowing that if he took a stand, he might alienate half of his viewing public, he was super careful to try to stay relevant and find ways to address some of the key issues and topics without ever really seeming to take a side. That was how he played it. And so one of the tricks that he would do is Johnny liked to be away quite a bit, and he would have people guest host for him, and he would sometimes choose his guest hosts strategically to allow them to address some of the controversial topics that he felt like
he needed to step away from.
That he couldn't do, but it was a way of kind of letting you know his opinions without him
committing to it.
Yes, exactly. So for example, Johnny chose Harry Belafonte to guest host for him in the late 1960s one time, and two of Harry's guests on the show were Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr.
That's cool.
Yeah, very cool. Over time, of course, Johnny's star power is rising, and NBC basically had the monopoly on the late night time slot. I mean, nobody else is putting anything out there. They're hesitant actually to compete with Johnny Carson because he is doing so well. But finally, the other channels were like, you know what?
Better than static.
Right. I mean,
Better
come
than
on.
nothing.
I mean, come on. So ABC started a show with Joey Bishop as the host. And then in 1969, CBS decided they would give Merv Griffin a late night talk show. Now, interestingly enough, what they said was that Merv held his own, Joey did not. So before long, Joey Bishop's show was gone. But then ABC decided, hey, we'll try Dick Cavett. And he did pretty well. And while Johnny and Merv were both these charming hosts who focused primarily on comedy and entertainment, Dick Cavett came across as a very intellectual man who was not afraid to address the politics and the hot topics of the day. Yeah. And also one of the notes they made was that he moved out from behind the desk and he would kind of sit alongside his guests, which was a little bit different. Again, he didn't have as high a ratings, but he gets a lot of respect, I think, for what he brought to the late night talk show.
And you also talked about him in the Memorable Moments episode.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the Tonight Show moved to Burbank from New York City in 1972, which worked well for Johnny personally and also helped them book more guests.
Yeah, because you're right there in the middle of it.
Yep. And one of the things Johnny Carson has been credited for is launching the careers of numerous comedians.
Oh, yeah, because if he liked you, he invited you over to sit on the couch, and that was such a big deal.
Yes, yes. And you know what? Even if he didn't put you on the couch, getting to perform on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show changed your career. It changed your life. He even had a fella, he might have had more than one, but they specifically called out this one man that Johnny put in charge of basically scouting the up-and-coming new comedians. This guy would go into the comedy clubs, watch people, and then they would invite them on the show. On this documentary, they had people like Ray Romano, George Lopez, Paul Reiser, talking about how this happened for them. Yeah, Byron Allen was one of them. He spoke about his first performance on The Tonight Show when he was still a teenager, and he said, quote, "The next day, offers stacked to the sky. Stacked to the sky." They all said this changed everything for them.
Wow.
And one of those people was Dave Letterman.
Letterman.
Yes. Johnny brought him on the show, and Johnny loved him. In fact, Dave was asked to be a guest host, I believe, after he'd only performed on The Tonight Show a couple of times, which was unusual.
That is a big deal.
Yeah. In fact, Dave would go on to host for Johnny something like 50 times. He loved Dave
did.
Letterman. Yeah. This exposure is what helped Dave Letterman get going. They gave him a morning talk show in 1980 where he and the head writer, who was actually his longtime girlfriend, Meryl Marco, developed a bunch of the bits that ended up working their way into his late night talk show later. One of those, for example, was Stupid Pet Tricks.
Oh, yeah.
Did you ever watch those?
I think, yeah. Yeah, I remember that.
Okay. The morning show that Dave did was wacky. It did develop a bit of a cult following, but the content just didn't seem to fit the morning.
Yeah.
And they canceled it pretty quickly. So according to the documentary, Johnny Carson is someone who played a big role in helping Dave Letterman to get the show that we all remember, Late Night with David Letterman, which started in early 1982.
It was that long ago?
I know.
Oh.
Okay, let's pause for a second. I love David Letterman too. I remember, I felt like, of course I was pretty young at that time, and I remember thinking in my mind, Dave Letterman was kind of hip and young and cool, whereas Johnny seemed older to me. Yeah, but I thought he was so wacky. I mean, do you remember anything that you loved about that show in particular?
I don't know. I just liked him as a person, which, and again, throwing it to our memorable moments, we learned something about him I'm very disappointed in, but not knowing it at the time, I thought he just seemed nicer. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe if I watched it back, I wouldn't think so.
He was very sarcastic and dry.
Yeah. But I don't know. He just seemed more approachable to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think because he was kind of wacky and quirky, he seemed more down to earth, more rather than a presenter or a facilitator, he just seemed like a guy out there making us laugh.
More blue collar.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, part of that was intentional. They talked about this on the documentary that from the beginning when the show started, remember he's following The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and they said, we want you to be different. We don't want you to come out and do a monologue in front of a curtain because that's Johnny's gig.
Yeah.
We don't want your band to be more like an orchestra. You need to be a little more rock and roll. But it's interesting because they said, one of the crew members said some of the very things they forced them to do actually helped them because it made them a little hipper. It made them appeal to the younger crowd. And that's what they needed because, I mean, if you're going to generalize a little bit, who are the people who stay up when Johnny Carson goes off?
Yeah, young
who's going to be
people.
up that late?
Yeah.
A lot of times it is your younger crowd. And they called Dave's approach almost like a college kid type approach.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it was fresh, a little bit irreverent. People loved it. But behind the scenes, a couple of people commented, one of them being that head writer and girlfriend, Meryl, that Dave was very, very, I think they used the term perpetually unhappy because he never felt like it was good enough. He was always afraid we're going to be canceled like the morning show was. He judged himself. He judged everything really harshly. So I wouldn't have expected that. He seemed kind of easygoing on the surface to me. But here's where things start to get a little touchy, okay? Jay Leno was a frequent guest on Dave Letterman's show. Dave had well, first he had some good luck. He got called onto Johnny Carson's show. He had done 4 appearances on The Tonight Show, the first being in 1977. That's amazing, right? Except that by the time he had done that 4th performance, Johnny and the producers had decided they didn't think he was very funny. So they stopped inviting Jay Leno on The Tonight Show.
Oh, Jay. I thought you were about Dave.
No, Jay.
Jay.
So between 1978 to 1986, Jay Leno wasn't on The Tonight Show. You know who kept him going?
Dave
Letterman. They were friends. They were 2 aspiring, comics. They had been working the clubs together.
Yeah.
So Dave would bring Jay on his show quite a lot.
Yeah.
And this really mattered because Jay's career was struggling, and it was his performances on Dave's show, because he killed it. Every time he came on Dave's show, he did a great job. This is what ended up making their friendship deeper, and also what brought back his popularity enough that finally they brought him back on The Tonight Show.
Okay.
Right? Now, once he comes back on it in 86, this time frame, he does really well. This is going to be important in a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. In the meantime, you know who else was doing really well on The Tonight Show? Joan Rivers.
Ah,
Joan. Okay. So Joan was this other comedian whose career Johnny helped launch. She made her first appearance on The Tonight Show in 1965.
Wow.
Can you believe that?
No.
Yes.
She looked like a totally different person back then.
I know. So she credits Johnny. She called him her mentor. She was a frequent guest. He loved her. She loved him. And then, do you remember this controversy?
No, what?
Oh, there's so many things. We're coming up into all the controversies, you guys. We're getting into the tea. We're spilling the tea.
Sip it, sip it.
So her daughter Melissa is the one who talks on the documentary quite a bit about this, although other people obviously chime in as well. According to Melissa, Joan was one of the guest hosts that Johnny used all the time.
Sure.
She looked like she was primed.
Heir apparent.
Yeah, that she was the one who would probably take over when Johnny retired, because everybody started getting, they started
After 30 years, they start
speculating.
going, huh?
Yeah, by the late 80s, everybody's like, is he going to be leaving soon?
Yeah.
When he leaves, what's going to happen? Because he's been on top for like so long. Joan had her eye on that spot, right? But Melissa said that there was an executive who met with Joan and told her confidentially that she was not on the list of potential replacements when Johnny retired, that he'd seen it, she wasn't there. And supposedly that devastated her because, she's
she
like,
thought,
right,
yeah.
she thought I this could be me. And so this is what inspired her to take the job offer when Fox offered to let her start her own show, The Late Show starring Joan Rivers, which would compete directly with Johnny.
Okay.
She didn't talk to him first, okay? Now, this was big. She was the first woman to host a late night talk show, but this move cost her her friendship with Johnny. He found out about it from another source, which did not help, right? He didn't know the whole backstory of what made her do this. He just knew she was doing it. And when she did try to call him to talk to him about it, he hung up on her. And according to Melissa, never spoke to her again. Which I saw a little clip where Joan looked like she was crying about this, speaking about it. Yeah. It gets even worse for her because her talk show got canceled really quickly. And from that moment on, she was done with The Tonight Show.
Wow.
In fact, they say, and this is validated, right? This is confirmed. Melissa says that NBC banned Joan from all late night talk shows on their network, like forever. And they wouldn't have her on. Like,
because she took a show that directly competed with Johnny after she was told you're not going to be the heir apparent?
Well, and I guess maybe it wasn't common knowledge that she had been told that she wasn't going.
But still, they knew.
But still, no, she was banned. She was banned. And I know this to be true because Jimmy Fallon briefly spoke about it, because he's the one who finally invited her back onto a late night talk show, his talk show, when he started in 2014. He said, you know what? I know there was bad blood, but she's a legend. I wanted her on my show.
Yeah.
And they both got emotional during that interview.
Aww.
Yeah. There was the little controversy with Joan. Moving back into the timeline, though. When Joan left to go to Fox, it opened up a spot for another guest host, right? Somebody else who could step in and do a lot of the guest hosting.
Yeah.
Anybody want to guess who that is?
Jay Leno?
Jay Leno.
Okay.
Right. So it was around this time period in the late 80s where Jay is on the show all the time because Johnny is taking off more time to go play golf.
Yeah.
I mean, he is not as into the show.
Yeah.
So he's gone a lot, right? Yeah. And he's good at it. Everybody really likes him. Meanwhile, Dave Letterman and his team had their eye on that Tonight Show spot too. He's been there forever. Dave has been biding his time. He knows that he's great friends with Johnny.
Yeah.
Johnny loves him.
I always thought Johnny was kind of grooming him to be the next one.
He was. Okay. And everybody pretty much knew it.
Yeah.
Right? It's getting out, though. It's getting out that there's actually going to be a competition, right? And this Jay is going to be a contender when Dave thought he'd had it kind of sewn up. Exactly. It starts to cause tension. And Dave also... It said on the documentary, now I don't know what source this came from, but it said that not only was it a little bit, probably more than grating, but let's say grating to Dave that he's the one who gave Jay all these chances, and now Jay is going to be his big contender, but also it seemed to him, according to whatever source was speaking, that Jay even changed his image a bit to try to go for this spot. Like he'd always kind of been like this rebel, a little bit rougher, you know, as his identity as a comedian, and now he's trying to take on this more
polished look.
Yes, friendly, charming, kind of changing everything. And it just grated a bit, right? Okay, we're coming back to this. But now we have something else that adds a little heat to the mix. In 1989, the Arsenio Hall show premiered.
Yeah.
Hugely popular. Arsenio was the first black man to host a late night talk show, and he really, really appealed to young viewers in particular. And he would bring in performers that weren't being invited on other shows. He would discuss some of the issues that other people weren't talking about. It was huge. So the success of Arsenio's show raises the anxiety level for NBC because this is really the first time that they had a show that was
in competition.
That was really doing well, that was in competition with them. And this makes the executives think long and hard about who are we going to pick because we have to compete with Arsenio. Johnny, we've already said this, he openly endorsed Dave. But there was a secret deal.
What?
We're going to come back next time.
No. Okay.
In part 2.
Okay.
We're going to talk about the late night wars, the secret deal, because you know what? There was more than one late night war. You know, I think we're getting ready to talk about this issue with Dave and Jay. But did you know there was another one? Do you remember the other one?
Something with Conan?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
We're going to get to both of those when we come back.
What a teaser.
In part 2.
Armchair Psychologist.
But to wrap this up, for our armchair.
Yes.
Lots of history.
Yeah,
Lots
there was.
of history. Just in general, was there anything that surprised you or stood out to you?
The thing with Joan, that seemed like a bunch of, I have only the information you presented to me, but that seems like a lot of crybabies. Like, you guys are going to be this insulted that when she finds out that you aren't going to give her, that she goes somewhere else and then you ban her? What? Mm-hmm. That's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. That's ridiculous.
It did make me wonder, would they have acted the same way
if they knew she knew?
No, well, if a man had done that?
I don't know, but still, no matter who, would they have acted the same way if they knew that she knew the truth? Mm-hmm. Like, you were all acting like, I'm gobsmacked. I'm literally gobsmacked about that's just so childish.
Well, I also wonder about the motives of this executive who shared that with her.
Yeah.
Was it true?
Right.
Was, you know...
It also seems like it's, you know, I've talked about this before. False conflict is something that could be solved sitting down and talking to the other person. Right. And Johnny that was wrong not to let her explain.
Right, to at least have
hang
a
up on her.
conversation.
Yeah, everybody was acting, I don't know if Joan was or not, but they were acting very childish.
Well,
to my mind.
it just seems, I don't know. And I, I'm going back to this comment I made about would it have been different if she'd been a man? To be honest, some of the things that are coming up, we do see the men also acting a bit childish to each other too. So it may not have mattered about the gender, to be quite honest. But at the same time, I do think, wow, to ban somebody for
that's too much.
We're talking 30 years.
Unless there's some piece of information that is not being released that makes a huge difference, that's extreme and silly and childish.
And to be practical about it, this is this woman's career. You guys are like, oh, we're mad she betrayed us. But really, you're not going to let her perform on NBC late night for 30 years? How is this going to impact somebody?
That's a grudge.
Yeah. Whew. All right. Well, you know what? Let's go ahead and bring this to a close.
All right.
How about we cheers Steve Allen as the first ever Tonight Show host?
Let's
and
do
you know
it.
what? And Faye Emerson
Get
for
it,
being
Faye.
the very first late night talk show host. Cheers to you guys.
Cheers.
If you love what we do, please rate and review our show or become a supporter through Buy Me a Coffee or Patreon. Whether a single gift or recurring monthly donation, your support is what allows us to keep the tea brewing.
Subscribe on your favorite podcast app or the Scandal Water Podcast YouTube channel, and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Show notes are available at our website, scandalwaterpodcast.com, where you can also access the merch store and more.
This episode was executive produced by Candy Thomas, that's me, and Ashley Raymer Brown,
that's me.
It was researched and written by Candy Thomas and edited by Ashley Raymer Brown.
A special thank you to Josh Martin, who wrote, composed, and performed the Scandal Water theme and other music, Matt C. Adams, who created the artwork, and Joshua Reeve, who designed our website and provides ongoing technical support.
As a reminder, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes. The thoughts and opinions of the host during each episode of Scandal Water are their own and do not reflect the opinions of any future guests, advertisers, or clearly professional psychologists. Thanks for listening.